Segment 4. This is touchy, John, the case against John Yoo. I want to understand the case and the effect it's had on you. January 2008. Convicted terrorist Jose Padilla files suit claiming he's been tortured in custody, and he names you personally for claiming that you had authorized methods to which he had been subjected and arguing that you, therefore, were implicated in a violation of his constitutional rights. Is that a fair summary? When that happened in 2008, what was your reaction? Laugh it off because it's such a ridiculous assertion, or?
Well, first I can't, get into the direct merits of the case. It's still on appeal.
It's still on appeal.
But it's not a surprise that, as we've seen almost from the first year of 9/11, that captured members of al-Qaeda are using our legal system against us. I mean, some people in the Defense Department call it lawfare. They have been filing suits against American officials, not just here, but all over the world. They've been using habeas corpus proceedings in their own trials to force the government to release secrets about what the government knows about them, which is of great value to them. And I think our country still hasn't figured out how to balance our commitment to fair and open trials and legal proceedings with protecting valuable secrets while war is still going on.
Okay, let me ask a few questions, and you engage in a lawyer and tell me which questions are permissible and which are not, because the case is still on appeal. So you said that terrorists are using our legal system. It's Jose Padilla's lawyer who came up with this one, I presume. So the question would be, is it lawyers who actually sympathize with the aims of the terrorists, or is it good defense lawyers who look at what the legal system makes available to them and says, I'm going to take the most aggressive route I can, and I'm even going to sue John Yoo? In other words, is it the current state of the legal system itself that all but invites this kind of activity, or do you really have to be a believer in the terrorist cause?
I wouldn't personally say that the lawyers who are representing terrorists, convicted or the ones at Guantanamo, but themselves agree with what the terrorists believe. Any more than I would think, a criminal defense lawyer who's defending a murderer believes that his defendant ought to have murdered someone. I think their lawyers are certainly entitled to use all the available options that the legal system offers. I do think, though, that our legal system used to and should continue to foreclose these kinds of lawsuits. I mean, the biggest problem is that you don't want our officials to be worrying about being sued when they have to make these very difficult decisions about protecting the national security.
On December 7th, the Justice Department, now the Obama Justice Department, asked the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco to dismiss Padilla's case. Should it have to be the executive branch that asks the judiciary to dismiss a case like that? Shouldn't it got to appeal? The 9th Circuit let that thing go forward.
Well, I actually think that the government here is doing the right thing. I mean, they don't have to enter
the Justice Department is doing the right thing,
right.
But the 9th Circuit.
Yeah, I mean, part of what concerns me about these kinds of cases in general against the former officials in the Bush administration is that the courts, if they allow these suits to go forward, will get into the business of trying to second-guess or review the wartime decisions that people are making while the conflict is still going on. And in the course of doing that, they'll have to produce information in public that could still be harmful to our security. But the second thing is judges, if there's this idea that judges are going to review your decisions and impose liability on you, people are not going to have the full-throated debate you want inside the government. They're not going to make decisions perhaps fully in the national interest if they're worrying about their personal interests. And so you're going to have a risk-averse government. And that's, if you think about it, the kind of mindset we were in about terrorism before 9/11.
Well, so I want to bring you back to the argument in crisis and command. Does your experience being sued, and the case is still on appeal, for decisions you made in good faith as a government lawyer way back in 2002, 2003, what does that tell us about the current state of Article 2 and the inherent strength of the executive? Is it the case that the executive just is too weak to wage, despite all the attacks on George Bush for unilateral, that the fact is that you can't even have lawyers give you an honest opinion without worrying about prosecution in coming years? Is the executive too weak? Is it the case that this current chief executive simply giving away too much of his powers by failing, of the executive's powers, by failing to preserve precedent? What does your experience tell us about Article 2?
Well, first, I think it shows that the idea that we have this imperial presidency who sort of over-dominates everything and that this is unconstitutional, I just think is quite wrong. I think that these kinds of lawsuits, everything that Congress has been doing for the last 8 years, shows that the other branches can easily check the president and the executive if they want to. Congress, for example, often doesn't want to because they don't want to take the responsibility for tough decisions. I think the judiciary, for most of our history, restrained itself too because they realized these are not the kinds of decisions that they want to second guess, that they don't have the competence to do it, and they don't want to have people looking over their shoulders when they have to make these difficult decisions.
Last question in this segment. This comes from someone who submitted a question for you by Twitter, IDM Architect, anyway, that's a Twitter person. Mr. Yoo, in making your arguments, did you give thought to recriminations or prosecutions by future administrations? Was that in your mind at all back in 2001 to 2003 when you were at Justice?
When I thought about these questions, I knew they were controversial, obviously, and that someday there were obviously going to be people who were going to disagree with them, and who knows what they might do. But I tried to reach the best answer as I could without worrying about...
Did it cross your mind that suit might be brought against you personally?
I mean, I understand the possibility was always there. I would think the legal rules, as I understood them, would foreclose those kinds of suits. That certainly doesn't prevent people from suing.
Does what has happened to you mean that everybody at the Justice Department now is thinking about that in a more concerted way?
Yeah, I worry about that. I mean, I think I would not be, I mean, if they weren't.
So you were there in 2002, now it's 2009. In 7 years, we've lost ground. The executive has lost ground.
I think so. And I think this administration, I'm sure the people who are working there, some of whom were lawyers representing members of al-Qaeda in Guantanamo Bay, of course, they're certainly going to be worrying about this. And I think that will lead them to being more risk averse than may perhaps be in the nation's interest.